Wernher von Braun is considered to be one of the 20th century's most important rocket developers. At a young age he was inspired by his interest in science fiction literature to learn about trigonometry and calculus to better understand rocketry. Eventually he became a rocket engineer, designer, and physicist in Nazi Germany, where he worked with a team of other scientists to develop the V-2 rocket, which became the first guided long-range ballistic missile. Von Braun likely only joined the Nazi Party because he saw it as an opportunity to work on rockets, and there is no evidence to suggest that he even agreed with their views. At the end of the Second World War he was secretly recruited, along with the team that worked with him on the V-2 rocket, by the U.S., as part of Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was a secret program initiated by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, where approximately 1,600 German engineers, technicians, and scientists were recruited to give the U.S. an advantage in both the Cold War and the space race. Von Braun was among the first 125 Germans recruited as part of the operation. Von Braun was placed into rocket development because of his work on the V-2, where he was intended to help in the production of an orbital rocket launch vehicle. He ended up in a leading position in the Army Ballistic Missile Agency development team. With the space race going on, there were a lot of rockets being tested and developed. Among these was the Saturn series, developed by the team led by von Braun. The Saturn I rocket was able to carry a payload into a low orbit of the Earth. Then the director of the Department of Defense, Herbert York, announced that he had decided to cancel the Saturn series as it was using too much of the money and resources of ARPA, while there were more pressing projects. Later, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or as you probably know them as, NASA, was formed. Von Braun's ABMA team was transferred to NASA under von Braun's condition that the work on the Saturn rockets was allowed to continue. Under the new organization the development was resumed. Von Braun worked on a lot of concepts related to space travel and extraterrestrial habitation. In the year 1952 he published in a magazine article his concept inspired by the work of a Russian scientist by the name Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, for an inhabited circular space station that had artificial gravity generated along the outer rim. This gravity was generated by the rotation of the outer rim. Then in 1969 NASA produced this concept, which is worse than von Braun's concept because there would only be gravity toward each end and astronauts would become more weightless the closer they traveled to the center, rather than having a constant gravitation outward along the outer circular surface. Von Braun's circular concept also inspired the design of the space station in the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, which in turn has likely inspired many of this generation's rocket scientists. The rotating space station creates a centripetal force around the outer rim according to this formula, where a is the acceleration toward a point on the outer perimeter. Omega is angular velocity. And r is the radius of the circle. So in theory the station could be configured mathematically to simulate the gravity of Earth. For example, if the space station's radius was 10 meters, in order to simulate the gravitational acceleration of Earth the angular velocity would need to be about 0.99 meters per second, which means that it should rotate once over a period just over 6 seconds. Von Braun was the chief architect of the Saturn family, developing the Saturn IB, replacing the Saturn I, and next he developed the Saturn V rocket. The Saturn V is the rocket that landed the first Americans on the Moon as part of the Apollo program, and put the Skylab into orbit. The Saturn V is to this day the only rocket that has been used to transport humans to the Moon, or even beyond a low Earth orbit. The Saturn V is considered to be a Super Heavy Lift Launch Vehicle, or SHLLV, which means it is capable of lifting a payload of more than 50,000 kilograms into a low Earth orbit. The Saturn V itself has carried a payload of 140,000 kilograms into a low Earth orbit, which included the third stage, an unburnt propellant that was required to send the Apollo Command/Service Module and the Apollo Lunar Module to the Moon. The 140,000 payload ranks it the most powerful rocket that has been brought into an operational status, that is until 2022, when that statistic will likely be overtaken by 10,000 kilograms when Elon Musk launches his BFR. The BFR will also be reusable, unlike any of the super heavy lift launch vehicles. And unlike any other rockets at all, it is intended to be completely reusable rather than just specific parts being reusable. The Saturn V is the only rocket so far that has carried humans beyond a low Earth orbit. There are currently no operational super heavy lift launch vehicles, and the next flight planned for one is in 2019, when the SLS Block 1 is planned for launch, with 4 other rockets planned for launch in the following 10 years. Most large space exploration and travel-based organizations at the moment are very intent on the idea of exploring and likely colonizing Mars, particularly SpaceX, hence the plans for a completely reusable super heavy lift launch vehicle. Von Braun was publicly very much in favor of the idea of a human mission to Mars. As a recap, von Braun has contributed to the development of space exploration by influencing other scientists, both directly through his work and indirectly through his influence on other people, most notably producers of science fiction pop culture, who may in turn inspire future scientists just as they did von Braun himself in his youth. Von Braun's most notable contribution to space exploration, however, is the design of the Saturn V, as it is the most famous and powerful rocket to this day.